Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 192 with my guest, Tracy Thornton. Tracy is a steel drummer, composer, arranger, performer who I met in Trinidad in 2002 when we both played with Phase 2 Pan Groove, and it was nice to connect with him again here. He has a project called Pan Rocks that has been advocating for rock music in Pan, but also just getting young kids involved and through education. Tracy's an amazing guy, a really great community organizer in the field, and is someone who's developing close relationships with Trinidadians like Mia Gormandy and Yuko Asada, who is not a Trinidadian but was married to Cliff Alexis. They formed a project called Pan and Unity that is really great. So I hope you check all those projects out. I really enjoyed talking with Tracy, and I hope you enjoy this as well. Okay, without further ado, this is my good friend, Tracy Thornton. Enjoy. All right, well, if you can hear me clearly, I'm rolling here. We will gavel this to order. Tracy Thornton, thank you so much for doing this. I thought about you right before, or actually, I watched a performance of yours, and I'll bet you can't guess what it is right before I logged on.
A new one or old one, could I ask?
It's an old one.
An old one. Man, I don't know. Sons of Steel?
I'll give you one more guess.
Been Caught Stealing.
Do What You Want, Phase 2 Pan Groove, 2002.
Wow, there's where our roots are, man.
I know. And you know who else was in that band?
Who?
Kendall Williams.
Kendall Williams, yep.
He was in the front line. He was like 12 years old playing lead pan.
So was Chuckery. I think he was like 14.
Johan Chuckery?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was there. His mom used to come to all the rehearsals and stand beside him in the pan yard every night.
You know, I played at Kendall's cousin, Jerion Williams. Do you know Jerion?
No,
He's, in my opinion, one of the best soca drummers, calypso drummers in the world. He plays with Skiffle Bunch and Pan Elders, but he's the drummer for Bungie Garland and Fan Lions right now, and
wow,
down in
okay.
Trinidad. And anyway, I don't remember what my train of thought. What was I? Completely lost my train of thought. I thought Jerion, and he's awesome. Anyway, we were listening. Kendall teaches with me now at Princeton, and we were looking through some old performances and of old panoramas, and this one came up, and it's. I wish everybody was as lucky as I was, and I don't want to speak for you here, but for me, I'm flabbergasted. Like, I look at things in my life that are sort of sliding door moments. And I think that 3 weeks in Trinidad, the number of people I still am in touch with from that very first trip to Trinidad in one way or another is more than almost any other, more than grad school for me, more than so percussion. Like, it's just strange to me that particular time in Trinidad sort of was like, there was just a lot of things that were just like plunk, 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 and got chunked together that I didn't even realize was going to come to fruition until 20 years later.
Right. Was that your first time playing there?
In Trinidad, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's my first time like that too. I have my lifelong friends, Avis Bruce, Natasha Joseph, all those people. My first time was 95 with Potential. And they're like literally family, lifelong family friends. And it's just amazing, you know. And then I just kept hanging out with them in Phase 2 in 2000. That was 2002 when we played with them. And man, what an experience that was. I was kind of down there for a couple of other reasons than just playing pan, and ended up spending lots of time with Boogsy that year. And we were going back and forth to Matura to get some spiritual work done, both of us, because that was the year he was clean that year.
Right. I remember that he was drinking. He had a bottle of water in his hand the entire time, every time. And
he was going through this metamorphosis, and we were going through the same Obia man, way out mature out in the bush. I could write a book on that. And so it was really, that trip, the music was great too. I remember being in the, it was a different vibe from the Potential. It wasn't quite as family oriented from what I was used to, but it was, the energy that was there was really cool. And just playing one of his tunes was great, but being able to spend time with him, and I would watch him listen. He would have one of these little cassettes and listen to the rehearsals from the night before, and I was like, shit, man, he's going to change everything tonight. And, you know, and then he would. But yeah, that was a great experience that year.
Well, let me ask you. Just, I would love to talk with you about the OBMN and your time, because I had some moments of spirituality in Trinidad. My first time being exposed to someone for whom like mystic healing was a thing was
Hmm.
was in Trinidad, and I got hit by a wave at Maracas Bay and really fucked my shoulder up real bad. Like
Whoa,
my
okay.
right arm was completely numb, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, and I'm pretty sure I tore something, and it's why my shoulder blades hurt to this day. But there was one of the guys in FaZe's yard. His name was T Shaka. He was kind of in charge of cleaning the yard and sort of
Okay.
tidying up. But when he found out my shoulder was hurt, he's like, show up at 10 p.m. I was like, okay. Like I'm 20 years old. I don't know. I'm just a person telling me to do something. I'm like, yes, sir, absolutely. And I show up, and he's got
Sure.
all of these mystic healing oils laid out in FaZe's yard. It's like 10 p.m. No one's there. It's just me and T Shaka, and he's like, take your shirt off. I was like,
Uh-huh.
this is it. This is how like they're gonna find my body here, and this is how this is gonna go. And he
Right.
just very politely massaged my shoulder with oils and was like, "How do you feel?" I was like, "I'm
Oh.
terrified, to be quite honest, sir. I don't know." um, but yeah, anyway, I want to get to that experience with you. But I'm curious if you can take me back to like baby Tracy and like what got you into like I know that you yes we have the phase two connection, but you also have your own sort of corner of the pan world that is the pan rocks sort of music that you arrange that has been you've been had a shitload of success with that recently, and I want to talk to you about that. But like, what got you into pan at all? Like, what would you grow up in a musical household? Like, what was your childhood like?
No, I was one of the kids. I was a drummer from 3 years old. I got my first drum kit at 3,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to be a basketball player. Of course, I didn't want to be a musician. I wanted to be play for North Carolina Tar Heels. That's our religion down here. And so since that didn't work out, I was the drummer in town that won the talent show in fourth grade, and then
Mm.
they put me in the band early, like high school marching band, 3 years early because I was supposedly a prodigy, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the military aspect of it. I stayed in the pep band so I could play kit, but I probably weighed 90 pounds. The big 15-inch snare drums with the strap, not the holster.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It, so I did that for a year. But then I just started playing with rock bands in 15, and then I ended up, being in bands in high school. So while my friends were in high school on the weekends, I was doing the clubs and that kind of thing. So I was like, I wanted to be a rock star.
Were your parents
And
like? What did your folks do for a living? Were they supportive of this path?
they were, yeah, man. My parents are amazing. They're still around. Me and my pop still ride motorcycles. He's like 83, but they didn't like the fact I didn't go to college because I
Mm.
chose not. I went to art school for a half a year to appease them, and then I dropped out because there was a job at the local music store to sell drums, and I was like, well, I'll do that and be in a rock band.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't like that, but yeah, they were. They didn't like the music, it was heavy metal. They didn't like the scene. I was around a lot of older people. I was around a lot of things I shouldn't have been around at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I didn't get caught up in it. But they would come out to all the shows, like even Pan Rocks. If I'm in Texas or Ohio, they'll drive and come see the shows to this day. So
Mm-hmm.
they've always been really supportive. I've been really lucky with them on that. And
Are your parents together, or they live separately?
mhm.
When you
No,
say,
they're together. I'm still in Greensboro, North Carolina. And they live 20 minutes away. So
well, when you said Texas or Ohio, like, did you just randomly pull those states out? Like they'll drive to see?
yeah,
Oh,
like
okay.
I did a big show in Akron, Ohio, and they drove there. I did PASIC in at San Antonio, and they drove there just
Okay,
to be there.
that's
So,
awesome. Where did you play in Akron?
uh, did the first Pan Rocks thing was at the big theater downtown. I can't
The
remember the
Civic,
name of the theater.
the Akron Civic.
Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
big one with
Mm-hmm.
the big plush with the ceiling and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was the first concert back in 2013, just to
Okay.
see if it would work or if anyone would give a shit about it.
Mm-hmm.
And but long story short, I didn't even start playing Pan until I would say 23, 24. I heard Jane Says by Jane's Addiction. Perkins had the little pan in Jane Says.
I
And I
know.
was like,
I didn't know that he used pan in a Jane's Addiction
yeah,
track.
well, I'll back up a little bit. But when I didn't go to college and I knew this is what I wanted to do for a living, I was going to be a drummer. So this is before the internet and everything. I graduated in 87. So I used to drive down to Raleigh to State. I used to go to Duke. I used to go to UNCG and check out books on the history of percussion. And I would just put myself through this own little, what I thought was a school. And of course, all roads lead back to Africa. So I really got into West African drumming. And I got a teacher, Khalid Salim, and Chuck Davis African American Dance Ensemble, who used to be based out of New York, relocated in the early 80s to Durham, North Carolina. So the best djembe players in the country were right down the road. So I studied with them and got really heavy into that between the rock band thing. And then that opened up my mind to Indian music. And then long story longer, we did a concert one night, and Mark Ford, when he was still at ECU, his steel drum band opened up the show. And that's the first time I'd ever seen Pan live. And they were doing the cheesy kind of thing. They were killing it, but and I was just like, man, I want to do that. I was already burnt out on the road, the rock and roll road thing. I'd already been on the road 6-7 years. And then I got a pan from a Trinidadian guy here out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and taught myself how to play Marianne and Bahia Girl, and that was it. And then I heard Pan by Storm by Professor, the big panorama version. And to me, I always say this, that literally just sounded like a rock song to me. I could envision people slam dancing to it, the whole thing. And Professor became immediately my favorite arranger, and that was my favorite. I was just like, I've got to do that. And then fast forward a couple of years, I met him at Ellie Minette Steel Drum Workshop. That was the first time I'd ever been around other pan players in '94. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm not a reader. I found out I could hear things and play it. And Professor invited a few of us down for '95 Carnival, and a couple of us took him up on it. And you know how that goes. You go down and play panorama, and then it's every year that you can make it down. So it changes your life. So that's, in a nutshell, that's a long story short.
Well, when you went to, I'm curious about your, you got a pan, you learned Marianne and Bahia Girl, and then you're in Trinidad. Like, what were the conversations like? Like, for me, it was a long time before Bugsy and Cliff. Well, Cliff, I think, never really approved of me going to Trinidad. Like, I think, Cliff was, I mean, he was very supportive, but like he was really hard on Trinidad, and he was always like, do not go. Like, it was very strange, but when I went, he would call Bugsy and all of his friends down there and be like, keep an eye out for this guy. Like he was very supportive, but like he was harder on his own country than I think most Trinidadians in my experience have been. And it took a long time to sort of crack that nut before he trusted me enough to be like, come on down. And Bugsy, it's like I drove him around for a week whenever he was at Akron, and like took him to get food and sat while he practiced and listened quietly. Like, and I'm curious for you, like, how was that trust building? I mean, because I'm just going to call a spade for me. I'm a white kid from a cornfield in Ohio. You're a white kid from,
Summerfield, North Carolina. Same thing.
The mountains of North Carolina, corn, maybe. Yeah. Like, I was aware of the cultural differences as a high school kid when I met Cliff, and then 19 or 18 when I met Bugsy, but I wasn't aware of all the context behind all that stuff. I'm curious for you, like when you first met, Professor, how did that sort of, I don't want to say transaction, but how did that interaction go? And like, how did you build trust and enough to be able to get asked to go down? Because that's a thing, he's inviting you to his country, for God's sakes, and his band, like.
Yeah, I think I had like a nice liaison. Like I was saying, my African drum teacher, Khalid Salim, who's literally my second father, he was up at Broadport for years, and now he's back down at Durham, in Appalachian. But I think knowing him and then being in his world, coming from my white kid, the Toxic Popsicle playing at CBGB's world, I think that was a nice transition. I'd met Ellie before through a friend of mine who was an apprentice of his. I met him when he was still traveling around. And back, I didn't even know who Cliff was. I didn't know there was like an Ellie camp and a Cliff camp, I just met Ellie. He had come through North Carolina, I don't know, 3 or 4 years before he was at West Virginia. But when I met Professor, it's a funny story, actually. I was really nervous to go, because I didn't know if I could do it. And of course, I put myself in all the advanced classes. And again, like I was saying, I wasn't a reader, and I was around all these musicians that went to school and all that kind of thing. I was just a garage rock and roll guy. And the first day I was there, I don't know how my girlfriend found me, but I was just 6 hours down the road, 3 o'clock in the morning that first night, someone was knocking on my door, and she had came to tell me that my dog had died. She was watching my dog. So the first day of the camp, dude, I was sitting up in the stands, literally just crying like a little baby the whole time. I was just so heartbroken. I didn't want to be at the camp. I wanted to go home. And Professor kind of caught wind of that, and he was really cool to me, and we hit it off. And then he could find, he saw I could play, and I was learning. And like I said, invited us down. He didn't invite us down with a red carpet. He kind of threw us to the wolves in Trinidad. We had to figure it out. It was a whole different thing. But and that was my first experience being out of the country. But that's kind of how I met Professor. I hadn't really talked about that a lot before, but yeah, he met me when I was just like shattered. My life had just shattered into 1,000 pieces.
Wow, it's as you were. I said the thing about Cliff was a hard nut to crack for me personally, and he later became, and as you mentioned, the sort of two camps. Like Cliff to me is one of the most important Trinidadians as far as the history of Pan is concerned in the United States and the development of it in the education system. But like Ellie is the mirror image of Cliff. Like there's it not in a like better or worse way, but just like Ellie, there is a whole lineage of tuners and builders that have come out of Ellie's sort of camp that didn't happen with Cliff's camp necessarily. Like it's just been an interesting thing about their two approaches. Ellie was very forthcoming with how to tune. Cliff was much more protective of those and not like distrusting, but like he just was like, I'm not going to show you how to do this thing that took me my whole life if you're not going to do it your whole life. And if you that means you're only going to teach one student, like who's ever going to really dive in. And Ellie, I feel like really structured around showing these skill sets to other people. And then that meant you get people like Darren Dyke, Billy Sheeter, Emily Lemmerman, like all of these tuners that come out of there. But for me, and I never met Ellie, he somehow managed to go through my entire life and never cross paths with him. But the generosity is the thing for me that has always struck me about the Trinidadian community. It's not generosity without complications, but especially right now when everybody's arguing about like culturally what's appropriate for any given thing, cultural appropriation, what white people can and can't do, what black people should or shouldn't do, how all of these people, how people should talk to each other, how they shouldn't talk to each other. I just think like, man, if Cliff Alexis would have had to have adhered to the rules of today, I wouldn't have ever gone. I would have been too afraid, and I was fortunate to have people like Cliff who were just like, okay, you want to do this, let's do it. Stay away from these people, talk to these people. If you see this, run. If you see this, run towards it. Like all of those things. And it was just very gracious. And I'm just kind of like, I feel in these discussions around world music and whether or not as a white person you should be involved, I just feel like, did I miss something over the last 20 years? Because I've got nothing but support from people like Cliff and, Bugsy and all these other folks.
Yes, weird. Because, I was playing African drums before, drum circles and Remo drums and all that stuff in the late 80s. And these guys knew it was coming and they didn't like it. They knew what that was going to turn into. And there was a couple of them that kept encouraging me to play Pan because, they were like, and back then, dude, I had the dreadlocks to my waist and the whole bit, I looked like Vance Humphrey and not as pretty as Vance, but that whole kind of thing. But the crazy thing about it, like if your first time in Trinidad was 2002, and I'm no expert on Trinidad by any means, but I've been going down since 95. I've been married to a Trinidadian for 22 years now. And in 1995, dude, we would rehearse in Barataria, take a cab 3 o'clock in the morning, get dropped off at the promenade, walk through downtown to the Savannah to get the next cab. And you couldn't do that in 2002. So the first 2 or 3 years I went down, it was relatively, you had to keep an eye out, but everything was pretty cool. I remember around 99, 2000 is when some of the crack started coming in and the drug stuff. And then there was the perfect storm of after 9/11, Bush started deporting everybody. So you had a lot of guys that were involved in gang life and that kind of thing being deported back to Trinidad, and they were setting up shop. So the whole vibe down there's changed in the early 2000s. Remember, they used to have the Colombian style kidnappings. The murder rate went up like nobody's business. It wasn't like that in the mid 90s. And I'm sure in the 80s, it was a lot better than that. So my first time getting the feel of the island and the people and everyone that I'd met was a little bit different, I think, than your I wasn't quite as scared. You know what I mean? I
Mm-hmm.
was nervous. I'd never been out of the country, but it didn't have that connotation. Like my family from Princetown, they wouldn't, if they had to pick me up on Laventille, I had to meet them in Port of Spain. They weren't even going to go up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you would hear about it through them, but I never really, not until I cut my hair, no one ever called me Yankee or anything. They just thought I was like maybe a white local or something with the dreads. But
Well, it's one
yeah,
of I just haven't. I mean, a lot of this, my feelings on this stuff, I'm trying to like parse out as to whether or not what is it is true. What is it? What are my feeling? What of my feelings are true, and what is it is just bias because I've only had this really specific experience in Trinidad, and a lot. I've actually played more in the panoramas and worked and drilled with bands in Brooklyn, which is a very similar vibe to Trinidad, but um, the if you can play and you just keep your mouth shut and do your job, every door will be, well, not maybe not every door, but the doors will be open. Like you won't have to work as hard, and you can be a foreigner. Like the first 2 weeks I was in Face's yard, very few people talked to me. It was only after that second week, the guy behind me in the full army fatigues with the Black Panther beret playing guitars, who I was terrified of for those 2 weeks because I had only heard of Black Panthers from Rush Limbaugh. Like that was my like racism, like the the extremes of political violence in the United States and advocacy for against all this stuff. Like I was only hearing about it from talk radio, so I see a guy behind me with Black Panther stuff and I'm like, ugh. Like Rush told me about this guy. And but he tapped me on the shoulder. He's like, you're doing great. And I just felt like,
yeah, dude.
Oh my God, that was like the nicest thing anybody's ever. And it was, the next week and a half was just absolutely an open spigot of anything I wanted, information, stories, like. But there was that 2 week I had to cut my teeth.
Yeah, phase two. I remember I had to reprove myself there. I'd already played 4 panoramas in Tobago and a few different bands in Port of Spain. But I remember Avis hooked me up with Boogsy's like, Tracy wants to play with phase two this year. And I remember when I first came into the yard, they brought out the section leader and he was teaching me, I don't know, maybe the first 3 or 4 minutes of the song. And all these people gathered around. I was like, and you have to get it. You have to learn it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I did it and they were like, cool. And then Boogsy put me in the second row, told the whole band, this is Tracy's spot, don't move him, because my buddy Dave Lapio went down the year before, rehearsed the whole time, and they kicked him out the night before finals.
Yeah.
So you would hear about that thing. When I played in Potential, it was much more of a family atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So you had 8-year-old kids to grandparents in the whole band. It was a whole different scene. But remember in 2002, the what do you call it? Our theme that year was, remember, everybody was dressing up for Carnival like the Taliban.
Oh, that's right. And Ben Lyon was that big bomb tune that year.
Yeah, and then the guy that was doing our costumes, he was the only guy that wasn't nice to me in the whole pan yard. The guy that will walk around, I forget his name.
You mean the guy that was handing these out?
I still have mine, the lime green, the whole bit. Yeah.
I think I lost the pantyhose. I don't know where those got to, but
I still have mine, dude. I have all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was like, damn, I'm in this group, and I'm like, man, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. But, we were the Taliban, dude. And they were just kind of like, America, they kind of celebrated that,
Mm-hmm.
And so,
yeah,
but yeah, I remember phase two. I might have been more intimidated if my first experience was your first experience, it might have been different than if I'd gone in 95 and played with a band like Potential.
Well, this is where my bias comes in here. And like, I think I'm not completely aware of how much Cliff threatened Boogsy. I don't want to, Cliff's dead now, so I can't know for sure, but I had the connection with Boogsy before I went down, but so when I walked in the yard, I remember Boogsy came right up to me. Like, it wasn't that long after he was at Akron that I went to Trinidad the next year. So just that mere act of him recognizing me,
okay,
sort of like everybody's like, okay, Boogsy knows who this cat is. And then learning the tune was like the next step of having to prove myself, and I did it in 2 days. I didn't even go to a rehearsal in 2 days. It was just like 8 hours of Almond St. Rose. I'll never forget that guy.
And it wasn't that hard of a tune. It was amazing, but technically it wasn't, you know what
No.
I'm saying? It wasn't too hard, you know?
Right. And I learned that tune, and then, you just get thrown in the band. And when Bugsy turned around or wasn't paying attention, that's when I would notice like a few of the elder statesmen in the section would come and just stand beside me.
Uh-huh.
And very polite, like no judgment, no nothing. And one guy taught me there's one like bum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum, and they taught it to me like boom ba dum da da dum da da dum da da dum da da dum, except it's ba dum ba dum ba dum. It's all on the offbeat, and I was like, but he was teaching it to me on the downbeat.
Got
And
it.
I was just like, what the? And there was like 3 days where I was like, what the fuck is going on? Why am I cannot. And my buddy Jeff just leaned over for me, and he's like, "You got to start the whole passage on the E of one, not on one." And I was like,
See, I
cultural
learned that's how I used to
cultural
learn how to
differences,
from an African teacher.
Mhm.
You would never get the one. You could play a rhythm for 2 months in an ensemble, and you never knew what the freaking one was.
Right.
And then one day it would hit. You're like, oh, then it just turns around, and but you never got that one. You had to figure that on your own, and that was. I think that helped me with the rhythms and learning stuff in Trinidad, just
Right.
because a lot of times they wouldn't give you that, you know.
Well, and that moment was an odd sort of like I was grateful for my classical studies where I had like in my head when Jeff. Do you remember Jeff Knightsky? So
Yeah.
Jeff was my buddy. He was there with it, and so Jeff was just like, "You got to put it on the E." And because I knew what the music looked like, I was like, "Okay, cool." And so I just did that, and I was able to move it over, and I played the whole line. And then the section leaders were like, "Oh man." Like, so I was just like, trust me, that wasn't magic. That was just me knowing in the score where I was supposed to put this stuff. Like, to me, it's more magical that you can just tap this stuff out and play. Like, they play everything as if it's a downbeat. Every note is the start of the measure.
The very first note is a downbeat, right?
Right, and but that's why those big steel bands. That's why Renegade sounds the way it does. That's why Phase sounds the way it does. It's like, and that's why, just to call balls and strikes, that's why NYU Steel Band sounds the way we do. It's because we don't. I mean, we grew up playing, Porgy and Bess, and like things where like having a groove is like, or knowing where you are in the one is key. And anyway, just to say that I wish orchestras were taught by rote. I wish Beethoven 5 could be taught by rote to an orchestra who had never played it.
Well, it could be. It just needs a director like you to do it.
No, well,
it totally could be.
Yeah, I'm fine to do it. It's the union wages that would have to, for a month, that would be like, oh, cool, that was an awesome project. It cost us $45 million. That was really lovely. I'm glad we did this by rote,
Exactly.
Well,
yeah.
Tracy, I want to ask. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm good.
No, I was just going to ask, like, I want you to talk a little bit about your Pan Rocks project and sort of how that came. I mean, obviously, rock music and heavy metal music has been part of your life since, from what seems, birth. And the Pan world is one in which, arranging classical music and arranging pop tunes off the radio is traditionally in Trinidad. Those are like the two legs upon which at least the steel band world grew. Like, tunes off the radio, Dan is the Man in the Van, Mighty Sparrow, Lord Kitchener, all these things. And then you have the world music festivals where they're arranging Tchaikovsky and Smetana and all of these things. And then you've got things like Skiffle Bunch in the Rainforest with Bugsy, where it's yes, it's a panorama band, but this is a completely original form of music now in a classical style that's neither Smetana or a pop tune off the radio. And so just to say, like, arranging heavy metal music for the steel band is not weird in the Pan world. But in the music world, in the classical music world, I'm curious how much you've been seen as a weirdo just from the classical music world versus the Pan world. Because I'll bet in the Pan world they're like, well, yeah, that's Tracy's doing what we do. Like, that's what we do, is we arrange music we love for the instrument. And I'm just kind of curious from you, like, how did that stuff work in your head, and how was it received by people when you first started doing it?
It took a while, actually, because I had a group called Sons of Steel. They were a group of kids back in 99 to 2003. And I know there's a band now in New York called Sons of Steel, but I had a group of kids. They were 8 to 12, 14 years old. Mm-hmm. We had a national agent, a management company, and we were a full-time band. We had a home school. And I I wrote a lot of the charts that a lot of bands are playing now were from that group, like Dame Bramage and Carpe Diem and these kind of tunes that some of the charts I have out. And Andy Narella, he had saw us at a camp and really dug what we were doing and wanted to produce us. So he produced that CD for us in Nashville back in 2000. And some of my originals kind of had that rock theme. And the cool thing about Sons of Steel was, I mean, we would come to New York and open up for Machel Montano. We weren't playing like by a pool. We were like on main stages. And
this was not a bat mitzvah band.
We were the main stage at Disney. We would tour with the Wailers band, Burning Spear. We opened for Buffett. The Machel Montano gig in 2000 was killer with Iowa George and Drippity. We didn't know if we were going to get shot or what, because we're in Brooklyn, 10,000 Trinities, and so all that was a great experience. So for that band, it worked, and we had a whole show. And then when that band defunct, I remember I started going to PASIC. I'm turning this to a long story. Around 2004 with Alan Coyle, he used to have a booth. He was like, dude, just come hang out with me. I didn't even know what PASIC was. Come hang out with me at the booth, and you need to meet some band directors. And it's like, okay. And I remember meeting a lot of these band directors, and they're, hey, where did you go to school? I shake their hand. I was like, I didn't go to school, and the conversation will be over. I just wasn't in the click, And then it wasn't until 2008 that Chris Tanner saw me somewhere, and he gave me my first gig coming to a school, and we did a couple of my songs. And then
Chris runs the band at Miami of Ohio, just for folks who don't know who Chris is.
So that was like 4 years, and then I remember a lot. And I'm painting the picture. I'm trying to enter this world of guest artists, because that's what you do.
There are in the pan world that like Andy Narell, Tom Miller, Pan Ramage, like in the college educational scene, I know, and there's many others, but Jeff Narell, folks would come through and be a guest with a band and sit in and play, and then would leave. They'd be there for 3 or 4 days, and then
Right. And there was a handful of them. There was literally 5 or 6 guys. Yeah. And I didn't know if I could do that, so he had me come in. But I do remember hearing through the grapevine that this band's not going to play your music. It's not harmonically sound. It's not this, that, and the other. It wasn't Ray Holman. It wasn't Andy Narell. It wasn't Tom Miller. I was totally, at that time, 15, 20 years ago, I was coming from a whole different thing. To me, the rock stuff made sense because of what I said earlier about hearing Pan by Storm with 120. And every time I would write a song, I would hear 100 people playing it. I never heard it before. So that's what I was hearing in my head. And then in 2013, well, right before 2013, there was Marta Wetzel and some people used to put on, at the time, you see them all the time now, these festivals where you would have bands come and perform, and then at the end of the festival, they would all form like a moss band, right? We're seeing that all the time now. And I finally heard Dame Bramage with, 130 pan players, like in a gymnasium, right? And I was just like, whoa, this is exactly what I've been hearing in my head. And that was inspiration for putting on the first Pan Rocks concert. I wanted it to be a whole concert, but like moss band style, doing rock music. And the rock music thing, for one, that's just kind of my DNA and my language. And that's what I'm good at. But I kind of see myself as going into middle schools and high schools and some universities. Like, for instance, Tanner had me come in, and he had like 2 months to get a concert together. He was either going to do a panorama song and a bossa nova, or he could learn 15 pan rock songs. So I can go in, and the music's not brain surgery. The kids love learning how to play. But if we can turn on kids in, let's say, the middle of nowhere in Ohio, to pan playing a Led Zeppelin or Metallica tune, then I get to talk about Liam Teague and Trinidad and Victor Provost, or, and now I see a lot of students that I've worked with throughout the country that are at NIU now. They're not playing pan rocks anymore, thank goodness. They're beyond that. But I know I was a big part of turning them onto the instrument, the art form. And I'm really comfortable. That's kind of how I see myself, and I'm really comfortable with that. And then with the Pan Rocks in LA, being able to attach to some of these rock star guys, they just give me such a megaphone to reach people that I can never reach. Having Mike Portnoy on your Rush project, instead of 10,000 people watching, 500,000 people watch it. And if he's on it, then most of those people think it's cool, so they might check out the whole art form. So that's kind of how I see the whole Pan Rocks thing.
Well, I really like that you. I mean, just I don't want to say I'm relieved because I didn't have a sense of despair at all talking to you about this stuff. But like it is like a warm blanket when I hear you say like you're using this stuff as a vehicle to talk about Liam and Professor and Robbie Greenwich
Totally.
and these things like that. Making that connect as an educator for me, that's super important. And again, like it's very humbling to hear you say things like, they were playing Pan Rocks but they're not anymore, thank goodness. Like
Yeah,
there's
right.
that's you're showing humility about your own thing. And I think that's, I don't know, I just admire that. I don't have a question here. I just want to say, like, I think that's a really great thing to hear about this particular mission of yours, because I'm doing it a different way, but I have the same mission, which is like Bugsy, Cliff, Liam, Pat Bishop, all of these people are like my heroes and heroines. And if I can just get in the room with you through whatever means, I will tell you about those folks. But like whatever you need to do to get in the room, I'm curious. Like I studied. I didn't study. I had to sight read. Prepare yourself. I had to sight read Dane Bramage on a University of Illinois steel band concert a couple of years ago. So was doing a residency, and the steel band was playing something, and they asked me to come in and play. I was like, yeah, sure. And they were like, solo over this, Bahia Girl, or whatever. It's like, okay, I know enough to convince most people that I can do this. As soon as somebody knows what they're doing is in the room, different story.
Right.
But he put up
Totally.
Dane Bramage, and I was like, all right, here we go. I'm going to see where I'm at. And one of the things that, this is meant to be a compliment, but I feel like that, like the rock music, given that a lot of it structurally in terms of the way chords are structured on guitars, is a lot of open fourths, fifths things, and the way chromatic things work. I'm curious, as you're like arranging this stuff for the pan, did you find, I could imagine for a younger player playing double seconds, for example, having things that are fourths and fifths, it's like, oh, I see all of these patterns now way clearer than if I would have been playing even, let's say, Marianne or Bahia Girl. Like,
Right.
because you're doing like the third and the seventh. But in, Bob O'Reilly, your job isn't necessarily to be tricky with your harmonies. It's just to put the right fifth in the right place. And on pan,
Mhm.
that stuff lays really well. And so it's not a shock to me that when you get younger players on this stuff, it just sounds amazing because it fits so well. And I did all these Philip Glass arrangements, and I found that there was a natural, like they grafted onto the steel orchestra in a really natural
They
way.
just lay good. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh-huh.
like for you arranging rock music, I'm curious, like, is that part of your process, like the educational side of this, somebody's facility at the instrument, or are you just trying to make the tune sound good, or both?
It might be both. The weird thing about what you're saying is that, I'm a tenor player, and so a fourth and fifth is right beside each other. For years, I was playing thirds because you're in steel band, that's what I would
Right,
hear.
right.
So when I started doing the Pan Rocks thing, I don't know, 10 years into it, it took my brain, I had to untrain my brain for third patterns, the fifths and fourths, but they're right beside each other. That was like a challenge for me.
Mm, mm.
And it still is sometimes, because sometimes it's not natural. Um, but yeah, that's curious that you say that, because when I started doing fourths and fifths, I'm like, dang, if I would have started this like this, it would have been a whole lot easier,
Well, I say the sight reading.
But
I don't want to imply that Dame Bramage is an easy piece. I'm not saying that at all. But as somebody who's 41 years old, and I sit down, I'm like, I've practiced I've practiced whole tone scales with one hand as fast as I can get it on both double seconds. I've practiced chromatic scales as double stops all the way up. I've done all the things that are idiomatic to the instrument. And when I saw that, and I was like, I got 3 bars into it, and I was like, okay, every time I see these 2 notes in a row, I know that Tracy's probably doing this thing, and that's this thing, and that's actually way easier than it looks on the page,
hmm,
And as I
yeah,
was sight reading, I just sort of was like, well, I'm going to roll the dice here. Is this what Tracy's doing? I was like, yeah, go good. Yes, that's what he was wanting. And I just felt like, oh, this music is a really good way to build some very just like burp, burp, fundamental like techniques in your playing. I mean, I came at it from the other side of things, but I think your music does a good job of that.
well, what, like, say if I came like into your class one day, I'm this guy. Like, say you had Andy Narell 6 months earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I love Andy, and I owe everything I do to Andy.
Mm-hmm.
but I know, he wants every note perfect and this, that, and if the drummer misses something, he's going to be really upset, that kind of thing. Dude, we're playing rock music on pan.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually encourage players, like if we're playing Kashmir, if we're doing the vocal line, I'm encouraging pan players to get to the different notes at different times so it sounds like a slur. I encourage people not to be perfect because it won't sound rock music. I want them to have like the spirit of it and to enjoy it because they're going to learn, they'll be able to feel a type of music that they won't feel if Victor comes in the next time or Andy comes in the next time. And I'm totally cool with that. I'm just trying to give them a different experience on the music aspect of it, and then maybe the path that I took to be because luckily I've been a professional musician for 30 years. It's the only job I've ever had. And I just had to do it a different way. I have to work my ass off at it, and it's 24/7. But if you love what you're doing, you don't mind doing that. So those are the kind of things that I can talk about. And then for kids that have a hard time learning things, I can talk to them too, because say if you learned a panorama tune, if it took you 3 passes to learn a thing, it might take me 6. I'm just willing to do it 6 times. I'm probably not going to learn it as fast as you, but I'm going to get it. And when I get it, I'll play it as good as anyone on the planet. So that's just where I come from. And I think it's just kind of like ignorance is bliss. Sometimes I just don't know what I'm walking into, and I'm probably in a room that I shouldn't belong in, but I'm in there and I'll try to get out unscathed, So,
well, that leads me to this question then. I mean, this sort of, as you said that, like, should I even be in this room? Like the imposter syndrome. I mean, when I'm asked to drill a steel band in Trinidad by Kendall, and the owner of the band says, "Here you go," and I walk in front of 140 Trinis, and I'm like, "I'm gonna tell you what to do with your music? Like, why the fuck am I even in this room?" Like, that anxiety can wash over you. For you though, you're in the room with Mike fucking Portnoy. Like, talk about imposter syndrome. Like,
I'll tell you what I've learned and it's been the last 5 or 6 years since I've really been out in LA and kind of, I don't know how I got into the mix. Man, those guys are just super cool. And the one thing that we have to our advantage, a lot of steel pan players have to our advantage here in the States, is that it's something new and it's something they've never done before, and they're not familiar with it. So for Perkins or Portnoy or Billy Sheehan or any of these guys to be in a room and hear 30 pan, playing Kashmir or playing Tom Sawyer, for them, that's just like they shit their pants. And now I'm just telling Perkins, I'm like, I have to take you to Trinidad. You have to, I want him to play iron in a 120-piece band because he's just going to shit himself,
I'd love to hear Mike Portnoy sit in with like Skiffle Bunch or something. Like, I just, there's,
and he was just cool. And I was never a Portnoy fanboy, so I wasn't really intimidated by him. But when we met the day before the sessions and stuff, man, he was just really cool. And he was familiar with what we do. And like I said, for those guys to sign on to what we're doing out there is a big deal because they know that's part of they're not going to sign on anything that might damage their thing. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's a business decision. So that's been a really good thing. But what I was getting at is what I've learned being out there, and I wish I would have learned this when I was 18 years old, is the old saying, and I'm sure you know this, is everything you've always wanted is just on the other side of discomfort. So if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing and you're not getting to what you want. And put it on those projects in LA in a horizon that I've never been on. I had no business being there. I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. But if somebody's going to give me an opportunity, you just do it. And then you figure out on your own. And knowing these guys and talking to them about it, they operate the same way. Like, there's really you can say A, B, C, D, but in that kind of world, it's going to do this, and you just have to be able to bend with it and not stress out over too much of it. But then when I talk to these guys who are really successful, those guys are like comfortable in the uncomfort. It's like, you would never know I'm a gym rat because I'm so small, but I'm in the gym all the time. If I'm not feeling sore somewhere, I just feel real shitty, like a lush. So I've learned that in the last 5 years. If I knew that 30 years ago, man, I might be a couple of steps farther than I am now when I'm 50, almost 52. So,
well, there's something to be said. I mean, there's no pill that you can take to sound like Mike Portnoy. Yes, he sounds great by himself, but he's also had thousands of gigs playing with some of the best musicians on the planet.
He's like in 100 bands,
Yeah.
dude.
I mean, I think, but I mean, so yes, I think, first of all, yes, you deserve to be in the room. Yes, he's a nice guy, but he's still also the drummer for Dream Theater. Or was anyway. Like I think Imposter Syndrome aside, I would get in the room and be like, do you remember that tune, Yaitse Jam, or however you pronounce it? Like, it's Majesty backwards. Like that's what that would have been me. Like regardless, I mean, because he's still Mike Portnoy, you know. Like it's still a thing.
Let me tell you how cool that guy is. Because when we went into it, I heard all the ego stories or whatever. And after we were done with it and we got the first mixes, he called me. He was like, Tracy, man, because you don't know if these guys are going to like it or not. You know what I mean? Or share it on their page or whatever. You just, he did. But he was like, do you mind if I send this project over to Neil? And I was just like, of course not. And you know how private Neil Peart was. And, he was friends with Neil. I don't know if Neil ever listened to it or heard it or whatever. But the fact for Portnoy to make sure it was okay with me, Tracy Thornton from Summerfield, North Carolina, to let Neil hear this project, I thought was really, that was a humbling thing too, because guys like that, you don't know how they operate. And that was a good thing to see. He was a total gentleman about it,
That's awesome. What were some of the reactions of some of the drummers you worked with, or other, not just drummers, you had guitarists and people in the room too. Like what were some of the reactions? Were they pumped? Was there anybody, and you don't need to name names, but was anybody like, bro, this is not cool? Like I'm sure you had to have somebody that gave you shit, right? Like,
dude, when I did the first one, and I started calling band players to be a part of it, a lot of people didn't sign on because, all right, I knew I was coming to a crossroads, or I thought I was. Either this is going to work, or it's going to be really, really bad. Like, and then I'm going to have to learn how to flip burgers. You know what I mean? But I was given the opportunity. I found a handful of players, like 25, 30 players, to go out there on that first one. And of course, Perkins was already on board. I'd already done some work with him, and he was familiar that I'd already done like a whole Jane's Addiction tribute record that he was familiar with. So he was hip to the idea. And of course, it's a paying gig. Those guys are out there hustling like anyone else. Yeah. And, but Matt Starr was kind of the focal point of all this. He saw me put together a small group at the Whiskey, and we did a couple of tunes with Perkins. And he was like, hey, dude, he knew what my vision of this whole thing was and what the end game, what I wanted. That's another conversation. And he was like, these are the steps, what you can do to take. He's kind of like the Tony Robbins of rock and roll people. He's like a life coach for rock and roll guys, right? So he sent me a proposal for the first Pan Rocks thing. And he had a list of, these are the bass players I can get you and what they're going to cost you. And the names on it were insane. Of course, Billy Sheehan was on there. And I'm like, Billy. Guitar players, drummers, the whole thing. So we built the first man the first time. We had Phil X as our guitar player who was playing with Bon Jovi. But he fell through the week before. So we got Tracy Guns, which is, I grew up on those guys back in the 80s. And he was just really what I was saying earlier, those guys have never heard anything like this before, like even Billy Sheehan, and they were just blown away. And I remember when it was going to go public, I was like, well, 51% of people are positive and 49 are negative on it. Okay, that's a win. And I think there's just been a couple of negative things. I think I've only read one post on a YouTube thing saying, this is the whitest steel drum band we've ever seen. And I thought it was going to really turn into something like that. But I think if maybe I have a little street cred, but the people that know me, and especially my friends in Trinidad, I think they know where I'm coming from with it. Like just the whole, I don't want to say integrity is a deep word, but maybe more the intention.
Yeah, no.
So I think everything happened for a reason like that, because 15 years ago, if I would have done this, I would have been a pan pirate and I would have been crucified where the art form was. So I think in 2005.
Crucified by who, do you think?
By the art form. It hasn't been until maybe the last 10 years that I think, like outside of Trinidad pan players have taken the instrument to use it as their voice, whatever their voice is, like Jonathan Scales. He's playing pan, but he's a saxophone player, and he's got a whole sound in his. He just chose the pan to be his voice. I'm kind of doing that with rock music. I'm playing rock music. My dream band is to be in a steel drum rock band, so that just is kind of my voice up until I think these days with what everyone's doing and branching out with different musics with the pan was either you were a calypso guy or you were like a badass jazz guy, you know, and not a lot of in between. And I think the instrument has grown so much that, you know, you're going to start hearing more ballets, maybe a whole soundtrack to a movie with pan, or, you know, just the whole legitimacy of the art form and the, you know, it being an instrument that's just, you know, I think we're getting closer to it not being such a novelty anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the reasons I said like generosity. When you I think you use the word like your integrity is important, and that street cred of like people who know you, and I'm curious moving forward, like, you know, any criticism I found in my experience, the criticism I get about using microtonal steel drums, for example, in so percussion. I have one lead pan that's tuned up a quarter tone from A440, so it's A559 and a half or something.
Whoa, okay.
And so when I play two lead pans like double seconds, I now have every quarter step between every pitch.
Okay.
C quarter tone, C sharp quarter tone.
Whoa, okay.
D quarter tone, E flat quarter tone sharp. Like, and so it's like, whoa, like you have not every pitch, but you now have another step.
All the semitones, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
You know, and it's awesome. And when you pair that with marimba and vibraphone and other things, it's just super weird. Really, the only criticism I've gotten from anybody it's been from white people not in steel bands. Like it's mostly been people not in the pan world. Everybody in the pan. I mean, listen, I don't think Trinidadians love microtonal pan and Steve Mackey's music with so percussion. but and I know for a fact Cliff Alexis didn't. But he was always just like, you're doing work. You know, that was his sign for like, I don't like what you're doing, but you're doing something good. So that's fine. Like, you know.
Well, that was the thing with me with Cliff. For years, I didn't know him, but I never thought he liked me. You know what I mean? Because he can be very intimidating. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And he would see me at Basic, and then when he finally saw the Pan Rocks, I guess he liked the band Emerson, Lake and Palmer or something like that. So he was cool with me, but I just chalked it up that he hated what I did, but he saw the positive in it. Ellie really didn't like it, but he saw the positive in it. Ellie just wanted to hear classical music on pan. That's why he was tuning pans the way he was, because he heard he heard classical music with his voices, right? Or that's what he used to always say. And but I think I'm with you on that. I remember being in the African drum community for a few years, and that's a whole deeper thing than the steel pan thing, as you probably are aware. And it was never African guys, my friends from Guinea or Senegal. It was always the American guys, and understandably so. I totally get it. But yeah, it was never, you know, Khalid or these guys. It was a dude from Brooklyn or
the people telling me, the people telling me that I'm doing something wrong with pan are generally the people who have the least amount of authority on pan, like, or the least, like, they've never spent, like, have you ever had bacon shark? Oh, you haven't?
Oh, yeah.
No, not you. Right. I'm saying, like, if somebody it's like, no, that's fine. I agree. Maybe you don't like have you ever had bacon shark? Oh, you haven't? Cool. Talk to me when you have. Then we can chat. Right. Have you ever had an Apple J with doubles? Oh, you haven't? Cool. You're welcome to your opinion. But I have, and I've had it hundreds of times with people who have also heard me. They're from Trinidad, and they maybe just shake your head and walk away, because that's sometimes what they do. But there's a difference between not liking something and not liking someone. And I feel like Trinidadians have a their scalpel is sharp on that front. Like, Cliff can be like, I do not like what you're doing. You are totally fine. They
can compartmentalize those things. Up here, you're either this or that. And we're just living in some weird times anyway. But I agree with you on that.
Well, let me ask you, Trace, just to wrap up here. What is, so Pan Rocks has had, I've seen you did the mass band thing. I think once the quarantine started, there was I don't know how many players you got total. You were shooting for 1,000.
Well, the first thing we did was the Pan Rocks thing we did with Perkins was I thought I'd have 20. I think we got 110 from 8 different countries.
Mm-hmm.
But with the Pan Rocks thing, what it led was what I ultimately wanted to do. And I was like, well, it's quarantine. I want to get 1,000 pan players from around the country who can I do this with. And then that's when I called Yuko and Mia, because I know Yuko, and I think after that I was like, okay, I'm good enough to be in the room with these ladies because they're just badass.
Yeah.
You know, in every way, they're like super better and smarter than I am on everything. And I called them and gave them my idea, and they were right on board. And what we thought might have been a month project turned out to be a 6-month project. And I've done enough of these now that, like I was saying before, you don't even know how you're going to get to the end game. But dude, after that conversation with them 1 week, talking to Mia and Yuko, 3 or 4 days later, Boogsy was on board to arrange the music. 2 or 3 days later, the music was done. And things just unfold, and then you just have to hang on. But then we were fighting with shutdowns and all, the 1,000 people was just not going to be a thing. And we had already announced we're going to have 1,000 pan players. So for us to nail about 700 from 23 countries to give their time and we told Boogsy, dude, 3-minute song, easy. The first piece of music he sent us was 9 minutes. So he got it down to 6.5 minutes. We're like, okay, fair enough. This is awesome. But for people to go out of their way to learn, 6.5 minutes worth of music and, to take the time to be a part of that was a really cool thing. And that's what I felt Pan Rocks is good now with the Pan and Unity thing, and I hope we still do some work. We have some plans with what we want to do. Then my little Pan Rocks thing is just kind of could be an umbrella or a part of that, because now the Pan and Unity thing is what the ultimate dream is to get pan players from all over the world to come together. If the world opens back up, maybe we can do a Pan and Unity concert on the back of the Yokohama Steel Drum Fest. And then, hey, Josh, man, we're having this festival over there. Maybe kind of figure out how to get people from the States into Europe over there for everyone, just to give people an experience. Because that's what I found out. I didn't plan this, but the Pan Rocks things that I do out in LA, I can't pay for people to come out there. People do that on their own dime. I can make their life a lot easier with setting up everything. But basically, I'm just trying to create the best experience they can have because they're giving me their time and they're spending their money. And it's just like, you want to hang out with Mike Portnoy for 3 days and play some music with this guy and put him on your resume, and fuck yeah, they want to do that. So until I can pay people or whatever, this is kind of how we have to roll. And just to give people some life experiences. And the thing with the Pan and Unity, with that whole started with the, George Floyd thing, the COVID thing, this America's just going freaking insane because we're just living in weird times. What better way to present people what unity can be with 23 different countries coming together and playing pan, making sure everybody knows it's coming from Trinidad and Tobago, that it's Afrocentric out of the Caribbean islands. And then you're seeing Japan and New Zealand and, South America and all that. And we were just hoping it was going to set an example for just to get some people to think, you know what I mean? Because there's not a lot of thinking going on. So that was kind of like my grand, I don't want to be too political about it, but just to like get people to like start thinking straight. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is it's so moving forward. Is this mission, like, what's the next sort of project that Pan and Unity and Pan Rocks is going to put out?
Well, Pan Rocks, I'm not sure. There might be another virtual thing going. I'm going to have a chat with Yuko and Mia. We said that we would chat after the phase 2 thing. Boogsy had hired me to mix and master their concert, he liked the way it came out. So I've been in the studio doing a lot of that. So they're really, really busy, but we've talked about a few things and we really enjoyed working with each other. It seems that our 3 talents, like Yuko dots every I and crosses every T. And I'm not that guy, but I'm saying whatever we all 3 do, we do. It's just, it was really a great experience working with those ladies.
Awesome.
I see Pan and Unity festivals, man. all over the world. It has to be international. Um, I would love to see, I forget what it's called, but you might have seen it on YouTube. There's this group, I think they're out of Italy, and they get like 1,000 people, and they'll do a 3 or 4 day camp in the middle of the woods somewhere in the Alps. And then they'll come out and play like Smells Like Teen Spirit with like 1,000 people. I see that with Pan, you know, have like this thing that could be a part of it. But with the Pan Rocks thing, you're seeing my ADHD going all over the place. My thing is like, if I can get Pan Rocks, say if we can get stationed in a Vegas show and then have a touring show like Stomp, then we could do like a Caribbean Christmas show, or we could do a big band show. And imagine if we were doing big band music and Victor was our guy, our guest artist for like a month. And then the Celine Dion people see him play instead of taking a violin player on tour. Then they're like, we want Victor. Now you have a steel pan on a stage with Celine, or you know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's my whole big vision. And then to give pan players a gig other than playing Margaritaville in Florida, or a teaching gig if they don't want to teach right after school. The dance, modern dance, ballet, they all have it. But to have some kind of world kind of thing that we can set up for pan players so they can get paid, they can get insurance, the whole kind of thing. That's like the big dream of all this. And then just have this amazing show that you would go see. And then have a production team and maybe have a school with people coming up through it. But if we had a Caribbean Christmas show in Vegas, you know, you could hire all your friends from Trinidad and they can be, you know, give them a gig, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this sounds to me, I mean, listen, nobody's working right now, so now's the time to scheme and plot about this stuff. Like, don't wait around until things are back opened up and every hall's filled, you know, like this is the time.
No, we're working on it. It's just one thing at a time. And I'm a one-man guy. I wish I had a team, but
well, that sounds, I mean, just, I don't know. I mean, I do want to apologize to you, Tracy. I think you did reach out to me for a Pan Rocks thing years ago. And there was something with I just could not, and I believe it was in Hawaii.
Oh yeah, that never happened. That was going to be the big Mark Schumann thing. That was going to be a big thing too, man.
And there was something, anyway, I could not figure it out with my schedule. And I just wanted you to know that I wanted to do it, but I did not commit. And I apologize if that, you know, we're on the same team, just sometimes it doesn't work out. And I hope that in the future, we can work out to play together in the same room again. The last time we were in the same room was Port of Spain, Trinidad. So, you know.
Yeah, dude, that's totally fine. You didn't have to say that. And I'm totally cool with, I get everybody has a life and their thing. So none of that stuff ever bothers me. And if I can get people on certain shows, the problem I have now is I have such a Rolodex, like the thing I'm doing with these guys in LA. I got together like a dozen pan players. When it comes out, like we did the thing with Portnoy Live in Los Angeles last year, I know a couple of people's feelings got hurt because they're like, damn, man, why, what now? They gave me 10 people. Right. So now I have that problem, which is a good problem to have, but I want 100 people every time, but you know, that doesn't happen.
Funding. We need to get sponsors from oil companies like they do in Trinidad. I think if, you know, I'd have less antagonism towards the oil industry in the United States if steel bands were funded by oil money like they are in Trinidad.
We should just all move to Houston and just hit them all up, man. And
so why don't you and I start an offshore drilling rig, and then that's for the next podcast.
Tax write-offs, man. They have to have a tax write-off.
That's right. That's right.
Their tax write-off.
Well, Tracy, this has been really great. I've stolen an hour and 6 minutes of your time. I appreciate you doing this. And I
appreciate you having me.
It's good to catch up. And I've been lamenting with everybody that this is sad that this is the only way that we can connect. But I hope in the future we can get together and have dinner and catch up and chew some more fat face to face.
Oh, that'll happen. And the positive thing about what we're doing now is like everyone's in our same position. So I've told a lot of people, it's like, you know, Perkins is my hero from Jane's Addiction. Guy's not doing anything. So I can call him up, Perkins, you want to do something? He's like, yeah, you know, so you can still cultivate these relationships that might be harder to do when we're not in these kind of times. So when it does open back up, you've got these relationships going and you can build on them. So if anyone's out there not reaching out to people, like you were saying earlier, now is the exact time because no one's doing shit.
Well, what's your website where folks can find your work?
I just tell everyone to go to panrocks.com. And I have all my CDs on there. My newest CD is free. You know, they can make a donation. No one buys music anymore, but I did a surf CD with a pickup to let everyone know that you can have one tenor pan, one insole pan pickup, and a whammy pitch shifter and sound like a full steel drum band. I cut everything with a tenor pan. Awesome. Yeah, panrocks.com.
Awesome, man. Well, I'll send folks that way. In the meantime, please stay healthy and safe. And I hope to cross paths again soon, man.
It'll be sooner than later, man. So
I hope so. Maybe in Trinidad. Let's have our first reunion be in FaZe's yard in Trinidad. I feel like that would be.
If I am in New York, I'll ignore you until we're
right. Yeah, please do. Just walk right by me and just avoid. All right, man.
Wait for Trinidad, but that sounds like a plan.
All righty, take it easy and be healthy. Okay.
All right, brother. You too.
All right, see you. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on, in percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner, builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandre Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.